For the young men of the American 8th Air Force, the sky over Europe was a realm of profound contradictions. It was a place of breathtaking sunlit beauty, of vast cloud canyons and endless blue horizons. It was also a charnel house, a three-dimensional battlefield where death could come in an instant from a flak burst or the cannons of an enemy fighter. Every man who flew into that sky knew that his life depended on two things: the skill of his crewmates and the integrity of the thin aluminum skin of their B-24 Liberator. And on a cold winter's day in February 1944, for the crew of a bomber named the N Nuff, both were about to fail them. Their mission was a brutal one: a daylight raid on the Messerschmitt aircraft factories at Augsburg, deep in the heart of southern Germany. It was a deep penetration raid, a long, grueling flight that would take them far beyond the range of their fighter escorts into the hornet's nest of the Luftwaffe's home defense. The bombardier of the N Nuff was a 24-year-old second lieutenant from New Jersey named James J.P. O'Donnell. O'Donnell was not a natural-born warrior. He was a quiet, bookish young man who had been studying to be an accountant before the war, but he had a mind for mathematics and a steady hand, which made him a perfect bombardier. His world was one of charts, dials, and the intricate, almost mystical workings of the Norden bombsight. His job was to guide his crew to a single, precise point in space and time and deliver their payload with surgical accuracy. The mission started badly and got progressively worse. Heavy cloud cover over the target forced the bomber stream to circle, waiting for a break, a delay that burned precious fuel and gave the German fighter controllers time to vector every available interceptor towards them. When the attack finally came, it was with a ferocity the crew had never before experienced. Swarms of Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts tore through the American formation. The N Nuff was hit hard. A 20mm cannon shell ripped through the fuselage, killing the radio operator instantly and wounding the navigator. Another burst of fire tore into the No. 3 engine, which erupted in a greasy black smoke. The pilot, fighting to control the crippled bomber, knew the equation. They were losing altitude, losing speed, and were far from the safety of England. They were alone and mortally wounded. He hit the alarm bell, its frantic ringing cutting through the chaos, the universal, unspoken command that every airman dreads. It was time to jump. One by one, the surviving crew members jumped from the dying aircraft into the freezing 15,000-foot air. J.P. O'Donnell was one of the last to leave. He grabbed his .45 caliber service pistol and his escape kit, a small pouch containing a silk map of Europe, a compass, and some concentrated food rations, and hurled himself out of the forward escape hatch. As his parachute snapped open with a violent jolt, the sudden, shocking silence was the first thing he noticed. The constant, deafening roar of the 4 Liberator engines was gone, replaced by the gentle rustle of the wind in his parachute lines. Below him was a breathtaking, terrifying panorama of the snow-covered peaks of the Austrian Alps. He watched as the N Nuff, his home for the past 6 months, continued its long, graceful and final descent, eventually disappearing behind a mountain ridge, followed a few moments later by a dull, percussive thud that echoed through the valleys. O'Donnell landed hard in a deep snowdrift on a remote, pine-covered mountainside. He was alone, deep in enemy territory, with a shattered crew and no idea where he was. By all rights, his war was over. His only logical options were to be captured by German patrols, to freeze to death in the wilderness, or to attempt the near-impossible trek to neutral Switzerland hundreds of miles away. But J.P. O'Donnell was not a typical soldier. The same quiet, methodical, and stubbornly logical mind that had made him an excellent bombardier now began to assess his new, desperate situation. He was an officer in the United States Army. His mission to wage war against the Third Reich had not ended just because his airplane had been shot down. The battlefield had simply changed. He was no longer in a flying fortress at 15,000 feet. He was now a lone infantryman in a fortress of mountains. As he got his bearings, he realized his situation was unique. He had landed in a sparsely populated, rugged region of the Alps, an area the Germans likely considered safe and would not be heavily patrolling. He had a weapon, a map, a compass, and a small amount of food. And as he looked around, he saw something else. He saw the vital arteries of the German war machine snaking through the valleys below him, railway lines carrying supplies to the Italian front, power lines feeding German factories, and mountain roads used by military convoys. A conventional soldier would have seen only obstacles and enemies. O'Donnell, the quiet accountant, the man of numbers and logic, saw something else. He saw targets. He made a decision that was as audacious as it was insane. He was not going to run. He was not going to hide. He was not going to surrender. He was a one-man army, and he was going to continue his mission. He was going to wage his own private and utterly secret war against the Third Reich, high in the snow-covered wilderness of the Austrian Alps. He had no way of knowing that his personal war would become one of the most remarkable and unsung stories of individual heroism of the entire conflict, a tale of a single, forgotten airman who decided to fight a whole army by himself. For the first few days, survival was J.P. O'Donnell's only mission. He was an accountant from New Jersey, not a wilderness survival expert. He battled the biting cold, the deep snow, and the constant, gnawing hunger. He learned to build shelters from pine boughs, to find edible roots and berries, and to move silently through the dense, snow-laden forests, always listening for the sound of German patrols. The Alps, which had been a terrifying sight from his parachute, now became his sanctuary and his fortress. During this time, he was not just surviving, he was observing. From high on the mountain ridges, he would spend hours, motionless, watching the valleys below through a small pair of binoculars from his escape kit. He was a bombardier without a bomb sight, but his training had taught him to see the world in terms of targets and vulnerabilities. He meticulously studied the patterns of the German war machine. He watched the long, heavily laden freight trains that snaked their way through the Brenner Pass, the critical railway link between Germany and its forces in Italy. He noted their schedules, the frequency of the patrols along the tracks, and the locations of the steepest grades where the trains were forced to slow to a crawl. He saw the high-tension power lines marching on giant steel towers across the mountains, carrying the electrical lifeblood to the factories in the south. He observed the military convoys, the trucks and staff cars that used the winding mountain roads. His initial plan was simple sabotage. His .45 pistol was useless for anything other than close-quarters self-defense. He needed better tools. He began his war with a rock. Under the cover of a moonless, snowy night, he dislodged a large boulder from a cliff face overlooking a sharp curve in the railway line. He timed it perfectly, sending it crashing down onto the tracks just minutes before a northbound supply train was due. The resulting derailment was not catastrophic, but it was effective. The main line was blocked for over 12 hours, causing a significant backup in German logistics. To the Germans, it was a natural rock slide, a common occurrence in the Alps in winter. No one suspected a lone phantom saboteur. This small victory emboldened O'Donnell. He realized he could be a ghost, an invisible force of chaos, but he needed better weapons. He got his chance a week later when he stumbled upon a small, isolated German forestry station. He watched it for a full day, noting that it was manned by only 2 older, weary-looking soldiers. That night, he approached the cabin in complete silence. He managed to subdue one of the guards without firing a shot, and a brief, brutal struggle with the second ended with O'Donnell in possession of a German Mauser rifle, a box of ammunition, and, most importantly, a rucksack filled with food, a good pair of boots, and a set of German engineering tools, including a heavy wrench and a pry bar. Now he was armed. His one-man war escalated. He was no longer just causing nuisance, he was causing real strategic damage. He used the stolen tools to systematically attack the infrastructure that the German army relied upon. He would climb the massive steel towers of the high-tension power lines and, using the wrench, patiently loosen the bolts on the main support struts. He would leave just a few bolts in place, so that the tower would remain standing, but in a critically weakened state. Then he would wait. Days or weeks later, the strain of a heavy wind or a build-up of ice would be enough to cause the tower to buckle and collapse, severing the power line and plunging a distant factory into darkness. To the Germans, it was an industrial accident, an act of God. His primary focus, however, remained the railway. He became the ghost of the Brenner Pass. He learned to use the pry bar to pull the spikes from the railway ties on the outside of sharp curves. A train hitting that section of track would not derail violently, but its wheels would slip off the rails, leaving a multi-ton locomotive and its valuable cargo stranded and blocking the line for days. He became bolder. He began to conduct small-scale, guerrilla-style ambushes. He would find a steep, narrow section of road used by German military couriers. He would hide, rifle at the ready, and wait for a lone motorcycle or staff car. A single, well-aimed shot from his Mauser rifle would send the vehicle careening off the road and into a ravine. He would then slip back into the forest, vanishing before any alarm could be raised. For the local German command in the region, these scattered, seemingly unrelated incidents were a growing mystery. A rock slide here, a collapsed power pylon there, a derailed train, a missing courier. None of them individually were enough to trigger a massive manhunt. They were attributed to accidents, weather, or perhaps small, disorganized local partisans. They could not conceive that this string of precise, surgical acts of sabotage was the work of a single, highly intelligent and incredibly determined American airman. J.P. O'Donnell, the quiet accountant, had transformed. The war had stripped him of everything: his plane, his crew, his identity, and in its place had forged something new. He was no longer just a bombardier. He was an infantryman, a saboteur, an intelligence officer, and a sniper, all rolled into one. He lived off the land and what he could steal from his enemy. The snow-covered Alps were his home, the German army his personal prey. He was utterly alone, with no hope of rescue and no communication with the outside world, but he was not idle. He was waging a methodical, patient, and increasingly deadly one-man war, proving that even a single, forgotten soldier, armed with little more than his own ingenuity, could still be a formidable weapon.